Well, temperatures are expected to rise to as high as 37 degrees in Sydney for this Sunday's AFL game. Pioneering research into heat and health has paved the way for a new extreme heat policy in sports. Joining me now is Professor Ollie J, one of the lead Australian researchers involved in sports medicine, Australia's extreme heat policy. Thanks very much for your time. So I guess the first thing when you think of heat is it can depend on the sport. Golf, for example, look, I struggle in that sort of heat, but the elite athletes would be okay. But something like AFL football, it's high intensity and short breaks as well. Is that one that's a bit of a red flag for heat?
Hey, good afternoon, Tom. Yes, so our new policy with Sports Medicine Australia that we developed in collaboration with Karen Bodrick and James Smorcombe has really stratified heat stress risk depending on the sport. So compared to the sport that you described, so golf is relatively low intensity, and so the risk associated with that type of sport relative to rugby league or soccer, for example, is going to be very different. So we make sure that the policy that we've developed ensures that one can stratify risk according to the sport and according to the local weather conditions.
And how do you sort of differentiate, in particular when you've got individuals going head to head? Let's say it's a tennis match and it's really hot. One of them might start having, so-called heat stress. The other one might be okay because they're fitter. I mean, whether you know it's something that one player simply couldn't avoid or another one just happened to be really at the peak of their fitness, because then you go, well, you've stopped a game. The person that was fitter feels like they're getting punished. How do you sort of differentiate there between just heat as a risk or fitness?
Sure. Well, it depends on the setting, of course, right? So if we're looking at the way in which we're trying to manage heat stress risk in the community, then the stakes are much lower than they are in professional competition. The approach that we always take is to try to protect the most vulnerable person, so the person who's at greatest risk. So fitness obviously plays a role. Heat acclimatization status also plays a role, and this is built into the model that we've developed. That's at the core of the heat policy that we have. The policy that we have is now a lot more accessible to people because we've developed a website that everybody can use this coming weekend with the weather being as hot as it's going to be. So if people Google SMA Extreme Heat Policy Tool, it will be one of the leading hits of that. And it enables people to enter the sport that they're playing. And it also integrates the weather information relative to the postcode that they'll be playing in as well. So it will enable people to understand exactly what type of risk and what type of strategies they can use to mitigate that risk.
And I guess your hope is that this is a bigger aid at grassroots sports. I was sort of focusing on the elite stuff, but they have a lot of help. They have, all these people, policies to set, doctors on hand, and people being able to see if someone's struggling. But when you're talking about, an Aussie rules game kicking off on the weekend, it'll just roll on unless you're told, hey, have these 10-minute breaks between quarters. Don't have 5-minute breaks. Just these little things that'll be able to help.
That's right. So the approach that we take is, what the problem is the hot athlete, not necessarily the hot environment. So if you can introduce strategies early to enable the player to keep cooler despite the hot environment, then that is very beneficial. And it means that you delay having to call off play altogether. Now, if we're looking at elite sport competition, then of course the resources that are in place to try to help manage heat stress risk are much greater. So the ability to have cooling towels, to have cold water available, maybe misting fans, all of these types of things that we know work at mitigating heat stress risk, they're in place in an elite athlete competition. But one of the things that we're really concerned about is making sure that we enable people at the community level who are playing in relatively low resource environments and may not be in as good a shape as the elite athletes, is ensuring that we have a policy that also protects them as well. So that's a really important consideration, I think, when we're thinking about the holistic approach to managing heat stress risk in a hot environment.
Okay. You mentioned cold drinks. I mean, there's nothing nicer than a nice cold drink on a hot day. I've got a particularly earnest mate, though, who's always said to me, look, the best hydration is as close to your body temperature as possible, so that's 37 degrees. Is that true? Does it make a difference? I mean, and is the reality that no one will drink that, so there's no point in trying to get it into people?
Yeah. We actually published a paper back in 2012, which the media love because we did a study where we actually demonstrated that if you drink hot water, you actually sweat a little extra And if that extra sweat evaporates, it actually offsets the extra heat that you're adding to the body. Whereas when you're drinking cold water, you actually reduce your sweating independent of core temperature. So you're basically no better off. Now, the reality is that you don't feel cooler despite sweating a little bit more when you're drinking hot water. We don't recommend people drink hot water on a hot day, but what we do recommend is that people drink water at the temperature that they find most palatable. Because the most important thing, of course, is maintaining that hydration status.